I'm just here to work, Mr. Mallory. That's all he wanted. To clock in, clean the gym, and go home. But respect isn't something you can mop away, and a man can only be pushed so far before something breaks. This is the story of a janitor who warned his bully 3 times. 3 times he said, "You don't want that." The trainer didn't listen. And one perfect punch later, he understood. Have you ever witnessed a moment so raw, so completely unexpected, that it flips everything upside down in a single heartbeat? I'm talking about the kind of moment where laughter turns to gasps, where confidence crumbles into shock, where the entire energy of a room shifts so fast you can actually feel it in your chest. The kind of moment that makes everyone freeze, mouths open, not quite believing their own eyes. That's exactly what unfolded one scorching afternoon inside Ironclad MMA, a no-frills fighting gym tucked into the industrial side of Phoenix, Arizona. Outside, the desert sun beat down mercilessly, turning the pavement into a griddle. Inside, the atmosphere was just as intense. The sharp clang of weights hitting the floor, the rhythmic thud of fists pounding heavy bags, grunts of effort, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes pivoting on worn mats, the smell of old sweat mixed with disinfectant hung thick in the air. This wasn't one of those sleek, air-conditioned fitness centers with juice bars and towel service. Ironclad was raw and unpolished, concrete floors with cracks running through them. Walls covered in peeling paint and faded posters of legendary fighters frozen mid-strike. Torn punching bags patched with duct tape, speed bags hanging from rusty chains, heavy ropes coiled in the corners. In the center of it all, commanding attention like a king on his throne, stood Marcus Kane. If you trained anywhere in South Phoenix, you'd heard of Marcus Kane. The man was built like a tank, broad shoulders, thick neck, arms covered in tattoos that rippled when he moved. His head was shaved clean, and under the fluorescent lights, it gleamed with sweat. His voice could cut through the loudest gym noise like a bullhorn. People respected his knowledge of combat sports, sure. But what really kept fighters in line was fear. Marcus had perfected the art of making grown men feel small with just a look. He had this talent for breaking people down mentally before they ever stepped into the cage. The most confident athletes would walk in feeling unstoppable and leave second-guessing everything about themselves. And then there was Jerome Matthews. Most people wouldn't notice him if he walked right past them. He was the guy pushing an industrial mop across the gym floor after the evening training sessions ended. The one wiping down mirrors before the morning crowd arrived. The shadow in the corner emptying overflowing trash cans and replacing rolled-up mats. Jerome was tall and lean, with a quiet presence that made him almost invisible. His voice was so soft that most gym members had never actually heard him speak. To them, he was simply the janitor, a faceless fixture, part of the building rather than part of the community. But on this particular Tuesday afternoon, everything was about to change. Marcus was in one of his moods. He'd just finished running a brutal training session with a group of amateur fighters, and his temper was already running hot. Mistakes irritated him. Hesitation enraged him. And when either happened, everyone in the gym knew about it because Marcus made sure his displeasure echoed off every wall. Nervous laughter followed his cruel jokes, because what else could people do? Challenge him? That's when Marcus's sharp eyes landed on Jerome. The janitor was off to the side, near the octagon cage, quietly pulling a full trash bag from a bin, his movements methodical and unhurried, minding his own business the way he always did. But Marcus locked onto him like a predator spotting vulnerable prey. In that split second, you could feel the shift in the room's energy, the way air pressure drops before a storm. "Yo, Matthews!" Marcus's voice boomed across the gym like a crack of thunder. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads whipped around. Training paused. Suddenly, every pair of eyes was focused on the man holding the garbage bag. Jerome froze, his hands still gripping the plastic, his shoulders tensing slightly. He wasn't used to being called out, especially not in front of a crowd this size. Marcus smirked, crossing his massive arms over his chest. "Tell me something, man. You ever even break a sweat in here? Or you just show up to clean up after real fighters?" A few of the younger guys chuckled awkwardly, not because they found it funny, but because laughing felt safer than silence when Marcus was in this kind of mood. But Jerome didn't laugh. His expression stayed neutral, maybe carrying a hint of weariness, like he'd heard different versions of this same disrespect his entire life. "I'm just here to work, Mr. Kane," Jerome said quietly, his voice steady and measured, carrying more dignity than the situation deserved. Marcus grinned wider, sensing blood in the water. "Work? Man, you're standing in a combat gym. We got a cage right there. Why don't you show us what you're made of? I bet you wouldn't last even 20 seconds in there with me." The gym erupted in louder laughter this time, though some faces showed discomfort, people shifting their weight and avoiding eye contact. Some folks clearly felt uneasy, but the noise and peer pressure rolled forward like a wave nobody wanted to stand against. And Jerome, standing there in his work uniform with a trash bag in his hand, faced an impossible choice. He could stay silent like he always had, keep his head down, finish his shift, and go home. Or he could finally step into a spotlight he never wanted, never asked for, and confront this moment head on. But here's the hard truth about life. Sometimes you don't get the luxury of choice. Sometimes circumstances corner you, and all you can do is respond. It was about respect. Marcus Kane didn't just run ironclad MMA. In his mind, he was ironclad. Ask anyone who'd trained there longer than a month and they'd confirm it. The gym bore his personality in every detail. The way warm-ups were structured, the intensity he demanded, the culture of fear mixed with excellence. Every poster on the walls, every rule posted in the locker room, everything reflected Marcus's philosophy of dominance. He wanted things aggressive, loud, and intimidating. Marcus hadn't always been a trainer. Years earlier, he'd been a fighter himself, bouncing around the Southwest Regional MMA circuit through New Mexico, Arizona, and Nevada. He wasn't a champion, wasn't a headliner, just one of those tough middleweights who could take serious punishment and dish it back with interest. He had a granite chin that absorbed punishment and heavy hands that loved delivering it. But time catches every fighter eventually. The wins became fewer. His body stopped recovering as quickly after fights. Injuries lingered longer. That's when Marcus hung up his competition gloves and picked up a whistle and training mitts instead. As a trainer, he built his entire reputation on one concept: toughness. To Marcus, being tough meant more than surviving a fight. It meant swallowing insults, eating your pride, and learning to channel anger into violence. That was his formula for creating fighters. Some athletes hated his methods and left. Others swore his brutal approach transformed them into legitimate competitors. On this particular afternoon, Marcus strutted around the gym with aggressive energy that dared anyone to look away or challenge him. His tank top was soaked completely through with sweat. His thick arms swung with each deliberate step. When he stopped near the cage, his mere presence pulled fighters and onlookers into a tightening circle around him. People gravitated toward the action, whether it was legitimate training or, in this case, whatever confrontation Marcus was orchestrating. "Y'all see that last drill?" Marcus shouted to no one in particular, his voice carrying to every corner of the building. "Half you clowns still can't throw a proper straight right. You'd get knocked out in the first exchange." Some of the younger fighters laughed nervously, desperately hoping to stay on his good side and avoid becoming his next target. Others kept their eyes glued to the floor, suddenly fascinated by their hand wraps or the condition of their gloves, anything to avoid Marcus's attention. Marcus thrived on this dynamic. He fed off the fear, the uncomfortable silence, the way people contorted themselves around his volatile moods. It reminded him that even though his fighting career was finished, his power and control were very much alive. That's exactly why Jerome Matthews had become such a tempting target for him. The man never argued back, never returned verbal jabs, never played along with the gym's aggressive culture. To Marcus, that silence screamed weakness. He genuinely believed he could chip away at Jerome the same way he broke down cocky fighters who came in thinking they were tougher than they actually were. But Jerome wasn't there for Marcus or his ego games. Jerome was there for a paycheck, nothing more and nothing less. Marcus couldn't comprehend that. All he saw was someone working in his gym who refused to bend, refused to submit, refused to acknowledge his authority. And to a man like Marcus Kane, that quiet defiance felt like a personal insult that demanded a response. So when he spotted Jerome by that trash can, it felt like the universe handing him a perfect setup. He had an audience primed and ready, and Marcus absolutely loved performing for an audience. "You think mopping floors builds character, Matthews?" Marcus barked, circling closer like a shark. "You think just showing up in this building makes you part of what we do here?" "Nah, man. You gotta earn your place. You gotta prove yourself." Jerome didn't flinch or react. He tied off the trash bag slowly, deliberately, as if Marcus's words were just background noise he'd learned to tune out years ago. That calm composure only stoked Marcus's fire hotter. Marcus grinned, and this time there was something cruel in it, something ugly. "Tell you what, why don't you step inside the cage? Just for fun. 1 round. We'll show everybody here that you're not just hiding behind cleaning supplies." The gym's chatter grew louder, more excited. Some faces lit up with anticipation, eager for entertainment. Others showed clear unease, recognizing that a line was being crossed. Everyone sensed something significant was about to happen, but nobody felt brave enough or empowered enough to step in and stop it. Marcus loved this exact moment, the build-up, the tension, having all eyes on him. In his mind, he was about to deliver a live demonstration to his students about how confidence and training could completely dismantle hesitation and inexperience, how a skilled fighter could systematically destroy someone who had no business being in the cage. He cracked his knuckles dramatically, smirking as he leaned casually against the cage ropes. "What do you say, Matthews?" "You and me. Just 20 seconds. I'll even take it easy on you so you don't get hurt too bad." For one long heartbeat, the entire gym held its breath and waited. Jerome set down the trash bag carefully. He straightened his back, and finally he lifted his eyes to meet Marcus's stare directly. And something in Jerome's gaze, something quiet yet steady and completely unshaken, didn't match the story Marcus was trying to tell himself and everyone else. But Marcus didn't notice that discrepancy. His ego had made him blind, and that blindness was about to cost him far more than he could possibly imagine. Jerome Matthews wasn't a name that anyone at Ironclad MMA knew well or cared about. To the gym's community, he was simply the janitor. The man with the industrial mop and yellow rolling bucket. The guy who appeared after everyone else was too exhausted to clean up their own mess. But hidden behind that quiet daily routine was a story nobody in that building had ever bothered to ask about or showed any curiosity toward. Jerome grew up in Oakland, California during the late 80s and throughout the 90s, an era when that city was harder, sharper, and far more dangerous around every corner. His mother raised Jerome and his younger brother mostly alone, working double shifts at a hospital. Money was perpetually tight, stretched thin across too many needs, and the streets had a way of testing every young man whether he wanted to be tested or not. Boxing wasn't a recreational hobby for Jerome. It was pure survival, a necessary skill for staying alive. There was a small community gym not far from his apartment building, run by an elderly trainer named Coach Phillips, who charged neighborhood kids just a few dollars per session, mostly to keep them away from corner dealers and gang recruitment. That's where Jerome learned to move his feet, protect his head, and hit back when someone came at him with bad intentions. The ring became his classroom. Gloves became his textbooks. Discipline became his armor. He wasn't chasing championship trophies or golden belts. He just wanted to walk home from school without constantly looking over his shoulder or being targeted by older kids. By his late teens, Jerome had developed genuinely quick hands and even sharper fighting instincts. He competed in several amateur boxing matches, nothing major or professionally promoted, just local events in community centers where the prize money barely covered a week's worth of groceries. But life had other plans and pulled him in different directions away from boxing. His mother's health deteriorated rapidly. Medical bills stacked higher and faster than any dream he'd been nurturing. So instead of pursuing fights, and maybe turning professional, Jerome picked up whatever steady work he could find. Construction jobs, warehouse night shifts, janitorial contracts, anything that offered reliable paychecks. Now at 41 years old, he found himself in Phoenix, Arizona, pushing an industrial mop inside ironclad MMA gym. He didn't mind the work at all. It was steady, predictable, and steady had become something he'd learned to value deeply after years of chaos. He kept completely to himself, nodded politely when people passed, and maintained his invisibility like a protective shield. That invisibility had become his armor, his way of avoiding conflict and drama. But invisibility always comes with a price attached. People like Marcus Kane interpreted it as weakness, as submission. They mistook his silence for fear, his quietness for inability. They looked at a man cleaning floors and automatically assumed he had no fight left inside him, that life had completely beaten him down. Jerome knew better. He knew the truth about himself. He still carried the rhythm of those Oakland boxing days inside him, like muscle memory that never fades. Every stroke of the mop mirrored the jabs he used to throw in Coach Phillips's gym. Every heavy bucket he hauled reminded him of the weights he used to lift before sparring sessions. His body hadn't forgotten a single lesson. The skills were still there, just dormant, waiting patiently for the right moment. So when Marcus called him out in front of the entire gym, Jerome wasn't genuinely shocked or surprised. This wasn't even close to the first time someone had tried to test him, to make him feel small, to assert dominance over him. But what Marcus couldn't understand, what his ego wouldn't let him see, was that Jerome had already faced far harder men than him. He'd survived far darker situations in far more dangerous alleys with stakes much higher than wounded pride. He'd fought when losing meant actual harm to his family. Jerome didn't answer immediately. That was his nature, his way of moving through the world, measured, calm, controlled, never giving the other person what they expected or providing them ammunition to use against him. The gym assumed he'd back down just like he always had, that he'd mumble an excuse and return to his trash bags. Some of the younger fighters even smirked to each other, already convinced this would be easy, entertaining content for their social media feeds. Finally, Jerome set down the trash bag completely. He wiped his hands slowly on his work pants, and he spoke, his voice even and clear. "Mr. Kane," he said steadily, making direct eye contact. "You don't want that." The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The way he said those 4 words, steady, not scared, not angry, not aggressive, just truthful, made several heads tilt in confusion. Marcus laughed, loud and mocking, trying to regain control of the room's energy. Don't want that? Man, you can't even lift a trash bag without struggling. You serious right now? Jerome didn't move a muscle, didn't blink, didn't look away. He simply repeated himself, this time with slightly more firmness, more edge. You don't want that. That was the essential truth about Jerome Matthews. He wasn't trying to act tough or posture for the crowd. He wasn't playing games or issuing empty threats. He was simply telling the absolute truth. And sometimes the truth, spoken calmly and with certainty, carries far more weight than any shout or threat ever could. The gym didn't know what to make of this moment, this unexpected resistance. But one thing crystallized with absolute clarity. The quiet janitor wasn't going to stay invisible much longer. The mask was slipping. And the more Jerome stood his ground with that unshakable calm, the more Marcus's pride twisted and transformed into something reckless and dangerous. The tension inside ironclad MMA that afternoon felt like a rope pulled so tight it was vibrating, one frayed strand away from snapping completely. Everyone had gone quiet after Jerome's calm, measured response, but Marcus absolutely refused to let silence claim victory. His ego was far too large, his pride far too loud, his need for control far too desperate. He leaned against the cage ropes, smirking, working hard to turn the crowd back in his favor and re-establish dominance. "Y'all hear that?" Marcus announced loudly, gesturing at Jerome with exaggerated disbelief. "Matthews here thinks I don't want it. That's hilarious. Man's been scrubbing toilets so long he actually thinks he's some kind of fighter now." The crowd laughed, but this time the laughter was noticeably thinner, weaker, more uncertain. People were starting to notice something important. Jerome wasn't folding under pressure. He wasn't shrinking or apologizing or backing down. They shifted their weight uncomfortably, caught between their loyalty to their volatile trainer and growing curiosity about this janitor who'd just drawn a line in the sand nobody expected. Jerome didn't rise to the bait. He didn't shout back, didn't curse, didn't let his body language show even a flicker of anger. He simply stood tall and still, his mop now leaning against the wall like a weapon temporarily set aside, but not forgotten. That complete stillness, that absolute calm, unsettled some of the more experienced fighters far more than Marcus's loud shouting ever could. Marcus couldn't stand it anymore. He desperately needed control, needed to make this janitor bend and submit in front of everyone watching. He motioned aggressively toward the cage. "Come on, Matthews." "1 round. I'll give you headgear, gloves, whatever safety equipment you want. Just 20 seconds. Show us all that legendary mop hand strength you've been building up." Nobody missed the contempt dripping from the way Marcus said mop hand. It wasn't just a verbal jab. It was a way of saying, "You don't belong in this world. You're beneath us." A few of the fighters exchanged meaningful glances. Some grinned eagerly, hungry for a show, for entertainment, for something to break up the monotony of training. But others frowned deeply, their faces showing discomfort. One of the newest members, an 18-year-old kid barely 2 months into training, leaned toward his workout partner and whispered urgently, "Yo, this doesn't feel right, man." His friend just shrugged helplessly but kept watching, unable to look away. Nobody dared step forward to intervene. The social cost felt too high. Jerome finally spoke again, and his words cut through the noise like a knife. "You really want this?" His tone remained completely level. No theatrics, no emotion, just a straightforward question from one man to another. Marcus laughed, harsh and loud, spreading his arms wide. "Oh, I want this. Everybody here wants this, don't we? He raised both arms high and a wave of cheers filled the gym like an orchestrated response. Though notably, not everyone joined in. Some people clapped slowly, hesitantly, clearly sensing that a line was being crossed that shouldn't be. Still, peer pressure is one of the most powerful forces in human behavior. The group energy pushed the moment forward like a current in a river, and no one felt brave enough to swim against it. Jerome sighed quietly, the sound of a man who'd just realized there was no diplomatic way out, that the only path forward led straight through this confrontation. He untied the knot securing his work apron and set it carefully on a nearby bench. He wasn't smiling, wasn't puffing up his chest or talking trash, just preparing methodically, like a professional getting ready for a job. A hush fell over the crowd. The janitor had actually agreed. This was really happening. Marcus's grin widened dramatically. To him, this was already a complete victory. He'd painted the scene perfectly in his mind. One clean takedown, maybe a flashy submission hold, and the janitor would be forever humbled. His authority in the gym would transform into something absolutely unshakable and unquestionable. One of the assistant coaches, a wiry guy named Devon, stepped forward nervously, his face creased with worry. "Marcus, man, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Think about liability. Think about what could happen." Marcus shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "Relax, Devon. It's just a little fun between adults. 20 seconds. Stop being paranoid." Devon backed off immediately, retreating into the crowd. He knew better than to push Marcus when he was in this mood. Meanwhile, Jerome slipped off his work gloves, the cheap rubber kind used for scrubbing and disinfecting. His hands, now exposed, told a story his quiet demeanor never did. They were scarred across the knuckles, calloused in specific places, rough from years of hard manual labor, but also bearing the specific marks of someone who'd thrown thousands of punches. To anyone who bothered to look closely, truly closely, these weren't the hands of someone unfamiliar with violence. But most people didn't look closely enough. They were too busy whispering excitedly among themselves, too focused on their phones, too caught up in the spectacle about to unfold. Marcus motioned impatiently toward the locker area. "Somebody get this man some gloves and headgear. Let's make this official and above board." Two eager fighters scrambled to grab the protective equipment. They handed the gear to Jerome, who accepted it and began putting it on quietly, moving with a smooth familiarity that suggested he'd done this many times before. His movements were practiced, efficient, no fumbling with straps or confusion about fit. That small detail caught the attention of a handful of people in the crowd, including some of the gym's more experienced fighters, but nobody voiced their observations out loud. Marcus bounced energetically on his toes, rolling his thick shoulders, shadow boxing dramatically, putting on a complete show for his captive audience. "Don't blink, people! This'll be over before you know it starts." But the ones paying genuinely close attention, the ones actually watching Jerome's calm and deliberate preparation rather than Marcus's performance, weren't nearly as confident about the outcome anymore. Something felt different. Something felt off. And in that heavy stillness, in that loaded quiet hanging in the air before the storm breaks, the real fight was already beginning beneath the surface. By the time both men stood near the octagon cage, the gym had completely transformed from a training facility into a makeshift arena. What started as a normal Tuesday afternoon training session now felt like a main event stage. People had formed a tight circle around the cage, some perched on workout benches, others leaning against heavy bags for better viewing angles. Cell phones were out everywhere, at least a dozen already recording, eager to capture whatever was about to happen for social media posterity. Marcus thrived on that energy like oxygen. He absolutely lived for moments like this. He rolled his massive shoulders theatrically, threw several loud shadowboxing combinations, his sharp exhales cutting through the nervous murmurs rippling through the crowd. He wanted everyone to see his power, his skill, his dominance before he even made contact with Jerome. "Let's do this, Matthews," Marcus barked, his grin wide and predatory, his voice sharp with anticipation. "Don't make me stand here waiting all day!" Jerome stepped into the cage slowly, deliberately, moving with purpose, but without rush. He wasn't smiling, wasn't shaking from nerves, just completely calm. He tightened the Velcro straps on his gloves with practiced efficiency, bent his knees slightly into a proper fighting stance, and gave the smallest nod imaginable, as if to say, "I'm ready whenever you are." The assistant coach, Devon, looked like he wanted to crawl out of his own skin and disappear. He paced anxiously near the cage ropes, muttering under his breath, "This is a terrible idea. This is such a bad idea." But nobody was listening to his concerns anymore. The crowd's collective energy had built to a roar that drowned out everything else, including common sense. Marcus raised his arms high to hype them up even more. "Y'all about to see exactly why I'm the man around here. Keep your eyes open and don't blink." The room exploded with a mixture of cheers and nervous, uncomfortable laughter. Inside the cage, though, the atmosphere was completely different. Jerome's eyes stayed locked on Marcus with laser focus, steady and unbroken. He shifted lightly on the balls of his feet, left foot forward in a classic boxing stance, his weight distributed perfectly for movement in any direction. A few of the older, more experienced fighters standing in the back noticed immediately. They exchanged knowing looks, one leaning toward another to whisper, "He's been in a ring before. Look at that stance." The other just nodded slowly, saying nothing but understanding everything. Marcus didn't notice any of this. He was far too busy playing to the audience, feeding off their energy. Finally, Devon stepped into the cage reluctantly to act as an improvised referee, his face showing his extreme discomfort with this entire situation. "All right, just 20 seconds. Keep it controlled. Don't do anything crazy out here." Marcus chuckled dismissively. "Don't worry about it. He won't last half that time." The two men touched gloves in the traditional pre-fight gesture. Marcus slapped hard and aggressive. Jerome offered just a light, respectful tap. That single contrast in the glove touch said absolutely everything about these two men. The cage door clanged shut with metallic finality. The sound echoed through the entire gym, instantly silencing the last remaining bits of scattered chatter. Suddenly, all you could hear was the faint mechanical hum of the air conditioning system, and Marcus's heavy, excited breathing as he bounced in place, ready to pounce. Devon raised his hand high, held it for one dramatic second, then dropped it sharply. "Go!" Marcus charged forward immediately, fast and aggressive, throwing a wide, looping right hand meant more to scare and intimidate than to actually land effectively. The crowd erupted in shouts, some people standing on their toes to see better over others' heads. Jerome didn't move much in response, just executed a small, economical pivot, letting Marcus's fist cut harmlessly through empty air. His eyes stayed perfectly calm, tracking every tiny muscle twitch, reading Marcus's body language, identifying every opening. He wasn't rushing anything. He was waiting patiently, professionally. Marcus reset quickly, frustration already creeping in, and threw a jab this time, then another, then a third, trying to test the distance and find his range. The punches came hard and fast, but Jerome's guard rose smoothly each time, deflecting them with the kind of effortless ease that only comes from thousands of hours of repetition, not from luck or chance. The crowd noticed the shift immediately. A visible ripple of surprise moved through them like a wave. This wasn't the helpless, overwhelmed janitor they'd expected to see. Victor, growing more frustrated by the second, growled through clenched teeth, "Come on, hit me!" "Stop running!" He swung harder, his movements growing increasingly sloppy with each miss, technique deteriorating as emotion took over. Jerome didn't answer verbally. His silence in that moment was louder and more devastating than any verbal taunt could have been. He simply continued letting Marcus burn precious energy, let him overcommit to wild punches, let him dig his own grave. The way Jerome shifted his weight and moved his feet looked far more like a trained boxer than a janitor. More like a man who'd performed this exact dance hundreds of times before in different rings under different lights. Devon glanced nervously at the timer. Only 12 seconds had passed, though it felt like much longer. Marcus snarled with pure frustration. "You're mine, Matthews!" He lunged forward aggressively, both fists flying wild and uncontrolled, all technique abandoned in favor of raw aggression. And that's precisely when it happened. Jerome saw his moment arrive. The opening he'd been patiently waiting for presented itself clearly. But before anyone watching could even process what was about to happen, before their brains could catch up to their eyes, the entire fight was about to flip completely upside down. The cage rattled slightly as Marcus stormed forward like a bull, his body becoming a blur of sweat-soaked muscle and desperate aggression. He swung wildly, searching frantically for that highlight reel knockout moment he'd already promised to the crowd and to himself. Every punch echoed sharply in the gym, creating loud smacks of leather gloves cutting through air, but none of them connected the way Marcus needed them to. Jerome kept moving with precision, taking small, calculated steps, never wasting energy. He didn't flinch from the onslaught, didn't panic under pressure. His shoulders rolled smoothly with each dodge, his gloves deflecting jabs like they were nothing more than annoying insects. The crowd, which had been roaring moments before, started murmuring with confusion and growing concern. They could see it now, clear as day. The janitor wasn't being overwhelmed. He was calculating. He was in complete control. Marcus threw a massive hook, the kind of punch that carries genuine knockout power if it lands clean on the jaw. But Jerome slipped inside it beautifully, getting close enough to feel the heat radiating from Marcus's body, close enough to smell his sweat. For one split second, he could have countered right there and ended everything. Instead, he deliberately stepped back, letting Marcus stumble forward slightly from his own excessive momentum, off balance and vulnerable. Audible gasps rippled through the crowd like electricity. Several fighters exchanged wide-eyed glances with each other. This wasn't luck they were witnessing. This was legitimate, undeniable skill. Marcus, his face now bright red with exertion and embarrassment, snarled viciously. "Stand still, Matthews." He swung again, faster this time, harder, but all the precision and technique had completely vanished. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was chasing. He was desperate. Jerome's facial expression never changed even slightly. Calm eyes, tight, professional guard. His breathing remained steady and measured, completely controlled. He looked exactly like a man who'd done this precise dance 1,000 times before, just in different rings, under different lights, against different opponents. Devon, still acting as referee, could feel the energy shifting dangerously. He shouted with urgency, "All right, keep it controlled. Both of you, keep it clean." But his voice barely managed to cut through the noise of the gym at all. People were on their feet now, some still shouting encouragement from Marcus out of loyalty or habit, while others were beginning to cheer for the underdog they absolutely hadn't expected to root for. Marcus jabbed again desperately, but this time Jerome had completely caught his rhythm, read his patterns. He slipped smoothly to the side, saw the gap opening like a door, and let his right hand begin loading with devastating intent. His knuckles tightened inside the glove. His entire body coiled like a spring compressed to its maximum. One controlled breath. One perfect moment. One clear opening. Then it happened with shocking suddenness. Jerome unleashed a short, compact right cross. It wasn't flashy or theatrical. It didn't make a dramatic whooshing sound. But it was absolutely perfect. His fist landed square on Marcus's jaw with a crack that instantly silenced the entire room like someone had hit a mute button. The trainer's head snapped back violently. His legs buckled beneath him. His eyes went glassy. And before anyone in that gym could even blink or process what they'd witnessed, Marcus Kane was on the mat, flat on his back, eyes blinking slowly in complete shock and confusion. The crowd erupted, but not with cheers, not immediately. It was pure disbelief. An explosion of gasps, shouts of shock, hands flying to cover mouths. Cell phones shook in people's trembling hands as they desperately tried to capture what they'd just seen. Trying to prove to themselves it had actually happened. Marcus, the man who'd spent the last 10 minutes mocking and belittling, the man who ruled this gym with an iron fist, the man who'd been absolutely certain he'd humiliate the janitor, wasn't moving. He was just lying there, staring up at the ceiling lights. Jerome stepped back calmly, lowering his gloves to his sides. He didn't strut around the cage, didn't raise his arms in victory, didn't showboat or celebrate. He just stood there quietly, breathing steadily, as if to say without words, "I told you that you didn't want this." Devon dropped to his knees beside Marcus, genuine panic in his voice. "Marcus! Marcus, you good? Talk to me, man!" Marcus groaned weakly, rolling slightly to one side, but the fight was completely over. It had ended in a single, perfect punch. The silence that followed felt louder and heavier than any cheer possibly could have been. The fighters standing around the cage looked at each other with expressions of absolute shock, eyes wide with disbelief. Some people mouthed the words, "No way. No fucking way." Others just shook their heads slowly, not smiling out of mockery but out of pure awe at what they'd witnessed. One of the younger kids, barely 16, whispered to his training partner in complete disbelief, "Yo, he dropped him." One hit. Just one hit. And just like that, in the span of 20 seconds, the entire power dynamic in that room shifted permanently. Marcus wasn't the untouchable king anymore. His aura of invincibility had shattered like glass. And Jerome, the quiet, overlooked Jerome, who everyone had dismissed as just the janitor, was no longer invisible to anyone. But the knockout punch was only the beginning of this story. What came after would change absolutely everything inside Ironclad MMA Gym. For one long, stretched-out moment that felt frozen in time, nobody in Ironclad Gym moved a single muscle. The sound of Marcus's body hitting that mat still seemed to hang in the air like an echo that wouldn't fade. All you could hear was the steady whir of the air conditioning unit and Marcus's heavy, pained groan as he tried to sit up, wobbling like a man who'd just woken from a terrible dream he couldn't quite shake. Then the whispers started, quiet at first, then growing louder. "Yo, he's out cold. Man, Matthews just put him to sleep. No way that just happened. No way." The circle of fighters pressed in closer to the cage, some with their phones still filming, capturing every second, while others had lowered their devices in pure disbelief, too shocked to even think about recording. Several of the younger kids who'd laughed eagerly at Marcus's cruel jokes just minutes earlier were now wide-eyed, staring at Jerome like they were seeing him for the very first time, like he'd just materialized out of thin air as a completely different person. Marcus shook his head hard, blinking rapidly, desperately trying to clear the fog clouding his vision and his thoughts. He pushed himself up on shaky, unstable arms, his pride hurting far more intensely than his throbbing jaw. The look on his face was one of pure, undiluted disbelief mixed with humiliation. This wasn't the script he'd written in his head at all. He was supposed to dominate effortlessly, humiliate the janitor thoroughly, and walk away an even bigger hero to his students. Instead, he was the one lying humiliated on his back in front of every single person who looked up to him. Devon, still kneeling close beside him, said softly with genuine concern, "That's it, Marcus. It's over, man. Just stay down." Marcus snapped back immediately, his voice rough and defensive. "Shut up!" I slipped on something. He just got lucky. That's all. But absolutely nobody in that gym believed a single word of it. They'd all seen exactly what happened with their own eyes. Jerome hadn't swung wildly or desperately. That punch was clean, sharp, precise, intentional, professional. Marcus climbed unsteadily to his feet, wobbling noticeably as he glared at Jerome with pure venom in his eyes. His jaw was clenched so tight you could see the muscles twitching. His fists balled up like he wanted desperately to go another round, to erase what had just happened. But the energy in the room had fundamentally shifted, and he could feel it in his bones. The room wasn't on his side anymore at all. The same fighters who'd laughed obediently at his insults just minutes ago were now looking at him with something much closer to doubt, even pity. And worse, far worse for his ego, genuine respect was flowing visibly toward Jerome. The janitor stood quietly in the center of the cage, gloves still on, his body still completely calm and composed. He hadn't celebrated even once, hadn't gloated, hadn't even cracked the smallest smile. That incredible restraint, that dignified silence, said far more than any victory dance or trash talk ever could have. He looked exactly like a man who didn't need to prove anything to anyone, even though he'd just proven everything. One of the younger fighters muttered to his buddy standing next to him, "Dude's legit." Like, actually legit. "That was no lucky shot," another added emphatically. "Did you see how he moved?" "He moves like a real boxer." "Bet he's done this before. Bet he's fought for real," a third voice chimed in. Marcus heard fragments of their conversations, and every single word cut deeper than any punch possibly could have. He wanted desperately to shout, to reclaim control, to reassert his dominance. But every time he opened his mouth to speak, the crystal-clear memory of that devastating punch hung in the air, heavier than anything he could possibly say. Finally, he spat out defensively, "This doesn't mean nothing. He ain't a real fighter. He's just the damn janitor." Jerome finally spoke, his voice steady and calm, but carrying undeniable weight. "Doesn't matter what job I do, Mr. Kane. Respect is respect." That single line hit the room harder than the punch had. A visible ripple went through the entire crowd, fighters nodding in agreement, trainers exchanging meaningful glances with each other. It was the kind of fundamental truth that couldn't be argued with, couldn't be dismissed, couldn't be spun. Victor's face burned bright red with embarrassment and rage. He stormed out of the cage abruptly, shoving roughly past Devon, completely ignoring everyone calling his name and trying to check on him. The slam of the locker room door echoed through the gym like thunder, making several people flinch. All eyes immediately turned back to Jerome. For the first time since he'd started working at Ironclad, he wasn't invisible anymore. He was the center of attention, whether he wanted to be or not. People approached him hesitantly, almost shyly, like they were meeting someone famous. One of the younger kids, voice full of awe, said, "Mr. Matthews, did you ever, fight for real?" "Like professionally?" Another added eagerly, "Yo, you gotta teach me that punch." "That was incredible." Jerome smiled faintly, a small, humble expression as he tugged off his gloves carefully. "I used to box a little bit. Long time ago now." That massive understatement only deepened the awe and respect in the room. For the rest of that day, whispers followed Jerome everywhere he went in the gym. The story spread fast through Phoenix, faster than Marcus could possibly contain or control it. By the time the evening training classes started, every single person at Ironclad MMA Gym knew the story. The janitor they'd all ignored had put the feared trainer down in one clean hit. But outside those gym walls, the story wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. The real test would be how Marcus and everyone else would treat Jerome after the dust fully settled and reality set in. Word spread through South Phoenix quicker than Marcus Kane could control or spin it. Ironclad. A gym, had always been Marcus's personal stage, his kingdom, his domain. But now the story circulating wasn't about him at all. It was about the humble janitor who'd knocked him out cold in one perfect punch. Clips from cell phones started popping up all over social media within hours. Grainy, shaky footage showed Jerome's calm, composed stance, Marcus's wild, desperate swings, and then bang, the punch that changed absolutely everything. For days after the incident, the atmosphere inside the gym felt completely different, almost unrecognizable. People who'd previously ignored Jerome entirely now nodded respectfully at him when he walked past. Fighters offered him bottles of water during his cleaning rounds. Several even struck up genuine conversations, asking about his background, his boxing experience, his life. Some of the more serious fighters asked him for technical tips and advice. Jerome never bragged about what happened, never replayed the knockout for attention or ego. He just continued doing his job exactly like always, mop in hand, quiet, steady, professional. Marcus tried desperately to act like nothing had changed, like everything was normal, but it had changed. Everything had changed. His commands didn't carry the same automatic weight anymore. Fighters didn't laugh as quickly or as eagerly at his jokes. Some even began openly questioning his training methods and drills, and that reality stung worse than any physical punch ever could have. Pride is incredibly fragile, and Marcus's pride had been completely shattered in front of the very people he'd spent years trying to impress and intimidate. One evening, about a week after the incident, Marcus crossed paths with Jerome in the empty locker room. The silence between them was thick and uncomfortable, loaded with unspoken tension. Marcus's jaw still showed a faint bruise, a lingering physical reminder he couldn't wash off or hide. He stared at Jerome for a long, heavy second before finally speaking, his voice low and bitter. "You got lucky that day, Matthews. Real lucky." Jerome didn't take the bait or engage with the ego. He just looked at Marcus calmly, his expression neutral, and replied simply, "Luck doesn't put you on the floor, Mr. Kane. Respect keeps you off it." Then he walked out quietly, leaving Marcus alone with his reflection in the mirror and his thoughts. And that's the fundamental thing about life that people often forget. Sometimes the people we overlook, ignore, or dismiss are carrying the heaviest, most important lessons we need to learn. Marcus thought strength was about noise, about dominance, about being the loudest and most intimidating person in the room. But Jerome showed him through actions, not words, that true strength lives in patience, in discipline, in quiet confidence that doesn't need validation. That afternoon in the cage wasn't really about boxing or MMA or fighting techniques. It was about dignity. It was about a man refusing to be belittled, refusing to accept disrespect, and in one perfectly timed punch, proving he was so much more than the job he worked to pay his bills. Life's exactly like that, isn't it? You never truly know what battles people have already fought and survived. You don't know what skills they carry hidden inside. You don't know what they've overcome just to stand where they are today. The person you underestimate and look down on today might be the exact person who humbles you tomorrow. So here's the crucial takeaway from this story. Respect people. Period. It doesn't matter if they're scrubbing floors, bagging groceries, serving food, or running a Fortune 500 company. Every single person's story is bigger, deeper, and more complex than what you see on the surface. And if you're ever tempted to treat someone as less than, to mock them or belittle them because of their job or status, remember Marcus Kane and that afternoon at Ironclad. Remember that the floor you laugh at someone for cleaning today might be the exact same floor you end up lying on tomorrow. If this story hit you somewhere deep, if it resonated with something you've experienced or witnessed, share it with someone who needs that reminder. And ask yourself honestly, are you building people up with your words and actions, or are you trying to tear them down to make yourself feel bigger? Because in the end, respect given is respect earned. And Jerome Matthews earned more respect in 20 seconds than Marcus Kane built in 20 years.